Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have quite a bit to talk about in regards to the Call of Duty League. We had the first week of the Major 5 qualifiers this past weekend, and it was honestly a really incredible weekend of matches, some really surprising results here. And we have a lot to talk about as we get even closer to the very end of the 2023 CDL season. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
I'm doing all right. Aaron Judge is back tonight for the first time in a little bit, so it's not a terrible day. And like you were saying, we got some good matches over the weekend, so looking forward to talking about those.
Yeah, let's get right into it because 10 matches this past weekend, 10 of the last 30 online matches for the season. And I think, we'll start at the very top, but the first few matches, the first match wasn't a banger, but the second match was a banger, and we had quite a few throughout the weekend. Atlanta versus LAG was the first match, 3-0 for FaZe. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. The only thing really of note was that LAG's losing streak continued with another loss. I believe that was their 9th or 10th consecutive loss. I'll look it up once I stop talking here, but LAG is probably nearing the longest losing streak in CDL history, which I think was the Legion last season, if I'm not mistaken. So we might be approaching historic territory, but did you have anything on Atlanta versus LAG?
No, I think this one went just about as expected. Looking at the individual maps too, 250 to 180 in the hardpoint was the closest. We've talked about hardpoint being Atlantic struggles, but then it was 6-1 in the search and 3-0 in the control, so pretty straightforward series, what most people were likely expecting.
I believe this was their 9th straight loss, so LAG haven't won. Their last win actually was against Vegas on March 4th, so it's been a little bit over 2 months since the Gorillas have tasted victory last. Not great, but not anything out of the ordinary for LAG, especially with how tough things have been outside of the lobbies and the business side of LAG so far. But the second match was everything that the first match was not. We had Atlanta, just stomping all over LAG in the first one, and then the second match was OpTic versus the Las Vegas Legion. I don't think either one of us really expected, I think we expected the result, which was an OpTic win, but how we got to that result was very, very different than either one of us really imagined, I would believe. OpTic ended up winning 3-2. A Game 5 Round 11 win for OpTic here. But really it was, I don't know how much of it could be chalked up to OpTic winning it. It definitely felt like another time that Vegas kind of just lost it. Like they really had a win right in their grasp and they let it go. What'd you think of this? Because it was, one of the best matches of the weekend. Both of the Vegas matches were actually incredible, but what'd you think of this OpTic win?
Yeah, I think this, heading into this set of qualifiers, we talked about how hard Vegas' schedule was and how they needed to, probably pull off a couple upsets to try and get close the gap a little between them and Minnesota. And, like you kind of alluded to, they had a really good opportunity to do that here against OpTic, probably a better opportunity than a lot of people gave them credit for, especially after their performance at Major 4. And, if you told me that Vegas was going to win map 1 hardpoint against OpTic with Clay dropping 38 in the hard point, I probably would have been like, okay, so Vegas wins the series easy. And then if you tell me that Vegas wins the control against OpTic, I'm like, okay, well, did Vegas win this series 3-0? Like what's going on here? But the fact they win that map 1 hard point and the map 3 control, but they still lose the series is pretty surprising, especially with how strong they've been in S&D. Dropping 2 S&Ds, and especially the Game 5 round 11 has got to be heartbreaking for Vegas. And the Shotzi post-game interview had to throw a little extra salt in the wound. I don't remember who it was, but in that round 11 on Hotel Search and Destroy, I think it must have been Standy, I think. Somebody died, double arches, and Shotzi called out that he thought it was Bomb. So I think his teammate was Dashy in the 2v2. So Shotzi thought Bomb was potentially down, and OpTic kind of backed up into B, giving Vegas full control of the A site if they wanted it. It turned out Bomb wasn't down, but then Vegas just decided to not plan A and go for a full rotate to B, and as it turns out, they rotated right into OpTic's waiting hands, and OpTic stole the dub. And the post-match interview, when Nameless told Shotzi that Bomb wasn't down, he was kind of like mind blown, and yeah, even Nameless kind of pointed. He's like, yeah, you don't realize how much that's gonna hurt Vegas, and just the fact that like a slight miscommunication. I wouldn't even classify it as a miscommunication because like if Shotzi thought Bomb was down, then like it is what it is. But it just turns out that him thinking Bomb down, even if it wasn't, was actually what kind of gave OpTic the win there. And it's not even fair to say gave them the win because obviously that's just the final round in a very intense series. But hopefully that illustrates the point that this was just super close, came down to the wire, probably a lot closer than even us as partial Vegas is winning champs bandwagoners, gave credit to the team. So, especially, that map one, like I alluded to, really strong performance out of Clay, and a surprising control win against them again. I don't know what OpTic's record is in control, but I feel like we talked about it before, and it's been pretty impressive. So, little bit of a surprising series in terms of end result, not necessarily end result, but it being a Game 5 round 11 and what maps each of these teams won in a 5-game series between OpTic and Vegas. Just all around a really entertaining series, went all the way down to the wire, and I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a rematch to this at Major 5 if it comes down to it.
Yeah, so OpTic's control record not great. It's their worst game mode, but I mean, okay. They're an incredible hardpoint team and a very good search team. So it's not like, they're not Vegas level bad. Vegas has been, really bad all season. So for them to even win that control was pretty amazing. At Vegas winning that control. And I tweeted it like during the match, like the Vegas Legion had won one series this year when they lost their first S&D. So they lost the first S&D to OpTic here after winning the opening hardpoint. The only team that they've beaten this year when they've lost that first S&D was OpTic in January when Illy was still part of the lineup. And it looked like that was going to happen again. It didn't go that way. I put it in the Slack chat, but Standy, he like switched to his knife for like a split second. He like YY'd, I think, right as he was getting into the gunfight. I think it was with Hook, like in the round 11, and he ends up dying. And I think that turned it into like it would have been like a 3v1 or a 2v1, and it ended up being like a 1v2 at that point for Vegas. I almost called him Paris again, so something's happening. Maybe it's just them losing kind of reminds us, but still a really good. Good result for OpTic, just getting a win, getting closer to the number 1 seed. And Vegas, I mean, I wasn't like surprised that they lost, but just them losing in that way just felt really kind of wrong. Like it just felt pretty cruel for them to lose when they definitely should have won. Seattle versus Toronto was the last match of Friday. A Toronto 3-0, which is kind of surprising considering the Ultra had been very poor online in the last qualifiers. Seattle had, kind of looked pretty good. The two teams seemed relatively even on LAN, but to come back on line and Toronto to win 3-0, I feel like that's a pretty big surprise. What did you make of the Ultras win here?
Yeah, I guess, I picked Seattle to win this one. If you had told me it was like a 3-2 series, came down to a Game 5, I wouldn't have been surprised either way of which team won that one. But I definitely was very surprised it was a 3-0 and as, dominant in a fashion as Toronto did, and especially this case. And especially like you kind of hinted at too, just based on Toronto's online play in the Major 4 qualifiers. definitely a bit of a surprising result, but maybe that just, it's such a weird case in my opinion because I really don't know how to explain it because you're coming off a major championship at Major 3. It's not like it was a new roster too, so I really don't think it was like a complacency thing or something like that that led to the online results. But it's really just hard for me. I would have to talk to the guys over there to see what they think happened in that period. But that's in the past now. Nothing they can do about that. It's just starting these qualifiers off better than they did the last ones. Is a good way. I believe this win or it might have been their second win. I'm not entirely sure, but Toronto did clinch champ spot. So now I believe OpTic, FaZe, LAT, and Toronto are all locked in for champs, and 4 spots remain.
Yep. Yeah, this win, I believe it was this win that they clinched a champ spot. So Atlanta at number 1, OpTic number 2. We'll talk about it, but Toronto jumped LAT in the standings, so they are now the number 3 seed, and LAT are number 4. New York is got to be like within a match or two from clinching, because they're only 20 points behind LAT. So the margin for errors, pretty wide for them. They could have a few mess ups from here until the end of the season and still make champs. But everybody else is probably a little bit nervous as we get closer to the end of the season. One of those teams that is got to be very, very nervous about how this season will unfold. The Minnesota Rocker. They currently hold the 8th and final spot going into champs. So if the season ended today, the Rocker would eke out a spot over the Las Vegas Legion. They have a 20-point lead over the Legion for 8th place. And they were the first match of Saturday. They hosted the second home series that they've had this season. The first one in Madison, Wisconsin, I believe, in the last set of qualifiers, where they played LAG and Florida, if I'm not mistaken. And then this one was in St. Paul, I believe. So a pretty local home series for them. In the first match, they played London. Second match played the Boston Breach, which is a pretty interesting match to say the least. But the London match was kind of what we expected. I don't think Minnesota is a good team by any stretch of the imagination. They've definitely disappointed from like what I expected and probably what a lot of other people expected from this roster at the beginning of the season, but they picked up a 3-0 win here over London. But again, it's London, not a really big win, but it is big in the sense that it gets them another win closer to champs. It kind of puts even more pressure on the Vegas Legion to win matches and kind of keep pace with Minnesota. So do you have any thoughts on this? Because we both picked Minnesota going in, so it wasn't that surprising of a result.
No, I mean, I think, it was probably even a little closer than you might have anticipated. 250 to 227 in the Hydro Hardpoint to kick it off, and 6-3 in the search and 3-2 in the control. I'm trying to remember it might have been one of them might have had a 2-0 lead and then the other one turning around. I could just be completely remembering it wrong, so I'm not even entirely sure. But nonetheless, speaking numbers wise, the series might have been a little closer than the 3-0 series indicates, especially in comparison to let's say the 3-0 by Atlanta over LAG earlier this weekend. But I think just the position Minnesota's in, that's a must-win series for them, and they were able to take care of business there.
Second match of Saturday, a banger. The Las Vegas Legion versus the New York Subliners, a rematch of the winner's bracket round 1 match that we saw at Major 4. New York in that match just absolutely demolished Vegas, sent them down to loser's bracket, and then Vegas ended up losing to Florida, I believe, in the losers bracket to be eliminated. This was not that kind of match. A really tight affair here, and we had an upset. We had the Vegas Legion beating the New York Subliners 3-2 with a 6-4 search win to close it out. But this had pretty much everything that you could imagine, like 2 pretty wide hard points. We had two close search and destroys, including a round 11 in the first search and destroy. We had another Legion control victory. It just had pretty much everything you could want, and especially for all of us Vegas supporters or Vegas's winning champs, bandwagon riders. This was a really great result, and it got the lead for Minnesota to 20 points instead of 30 points, and Minnesota actually played right after this, so they could have even extended it to 40 had Vegas lost. What did you think of Vegas's upset win over New York?
Yeah, it's a massive victory, especially in comparison to the performance they put up at Major 4 in this exact matchup. I really wasn't expecting this from Vegas, but putting into context their performance against OpTic and then how they showed up here is a pretty good weekend. Obviously, you perfect world you want to go 2-0. But with the strength of schedule or how tough their schedule is, the fact they were able to get a 1-1 split here this weekend against two teams of the caliber of OpTic in New York, that's a pretty solid result in my mind. I think it is definitely noteworthy too. Vegas was able to get another control win. If they're able to turn that around, and it looks like maybe the S&D is lacking a little bit. They won the game 5 in this case, but that means they would have went 1-3 in search this weekend as opposed to 2-0 in control, and then I think 2-2 in hardpoint. But nonetheless, yeah, if they're able to figure out control, that definitely only helps them. And it's like we've always talked about towards the end of these seasons, teams that start figuring out the game, especially late in the year, and are able to put it into gear just right at the right time. That's what you gotta look for with big money playoffs on the line. So definitely a very big upset, I think, in most people's eyes. But regardless of whether you think it's an upset or not, it's just a solid and important win for Vegas. And I think I didn't pull up the stats, but I'm pretty sure Clay had another nutty map 1 performance here.
Yeah, 34 and 16.
34 and 16, yeah. He's hitting his stride at the right time. I think he just turned 31 on Sunday too, something like that. Yep. So happy birthday, Clay. I'm sure that win. There was a funny clip on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it too, of him scrimming on his birthday, getting mad at the team, and
it's my birthday.
I know how much you like Clay, so I don't need to ramble on about it. But it's great to see him putting up big numbers like that, and that should only make Vegas more of a threat to get that champ spot if he keeps it up.
I think Clay. I know before last season he was like the only player that had been to every single champs or plus COD XP, and then he wasn't obviously on the starting roster for New York last season, so it didn't work out for him that year. But he has another chance at getting to champs, being the first one to probably to like 10 $1 million tournaments, which would be a really incredible feat. So there's a lot to play for, and obviously I think this is the best roster that the Legion have had since they've since they've been an organization. And this is their best chance. They're right there. It's not like they have to make a New York style comeback like New York did last season to try to get into champs. It's very doable, especially since they play Minnesota in the set of qualifiers. So I'm really excited. I think this was a great win. Obviously, like you said, you would want to go 2-0, especially with how close you were to beating OpTic, which would have just been like a massive, massive upset. Vegas, they win here. Definitely a very helpful result for them as we move on. Minnesota also played their second match for their home series right after the New York Vegas match. And I wasn't really expecting too much from this meeting because, Boston and Minnesota, they're both competing to make sure that they're safe for champs. But neither of these two teams are incredibly interesting with how things have been going over the past month or two. They're both about 7th or 8th in the league, at least in terms of talent and in standing. but it turned out to be kind of I mean, it was a show. Let's just say that it was a sound EQ heavy series. So Ben Nissim, who's the co-host of The Flank, if you follow COD Esports, you probably know who Ben is. He tweeted before the series, was told Boston refused a GA sound EQ for this upcoming series at the home series when asked by rocker TL thoughts on the decision from the breach. So I want to get your thoughts because you were probably on the TL at this time. So what are your thoughts on Boston refusing to GA, aka Gentleman's Agreement, and ban sound EQ, which is a setting in COD that's been very controversial, very hated by a lot of competitive players. So what is Bink's take on the matter?
Yeah, from what I thought I understood previously was that it was only an issue in online matches. I thought what I had heard beforehand was that once Sound EQ became an issue, that it was like patched out of, it wasn't like as big of a deal on LAN. But obviously that must have been either there was something different with like the setup for the Rockers LAN, or I don't really know. Probably
Yeah.
the case is that I just misunderstood what I heard about Sound EQ
No,
and
I
LAN
think
versus online.
I think you were right, but so Dens tweeted. So the GM of the Boston Breach, he tweeted, I know there's a bit of controversy. However, I stick by our coaching staff's decision to play with Sound EQ for our online match in the LAN environment. We are coming into a home crowd buff. Every team is using it, and we knew we could win the mental battle before the game begun. So I guess even though it was on LAN, it was still an online match. I guess because that's what I got out of that.
I didn't see that, so that's good to know. But regardless of um, what the specifications were behind Sound EQ, I mean, it's just, for me playing, I haven't played COD in months now, but you know, playing on PS5, if I was to play against PC kids with Sound EQ on, I'm just at a complete disadvantage.
Yeah.
So like I've never been able to actually use it and really know what the deal is with it and how much of a benefit it is, but obviously based on everything we've heard over the past couple of months, it's just it's almost like a whole different game with it on and with it off, at least according to multiple people's descriptions of it. So in a perfect world, I think you would have liked to see Boston GA it, but I don't know how much I believe the philosophy or the claim that it's more of a mental battle as opposed to just wanting to play with EQ on. But that aside, I think in a perfect world, like we've always talked about with the devs and the dev support for comp and stuff like that, this isn't even a debate we have to have because it just wouldn't be something that the players would have to deal with in the game. So I think it's unfortunate for Minnesota. Um, but it is part of the game. We've seen stuff like this happen with guns and other settings in the past, controversies over snaking, etc. So it's just until we get that really solid support and we get stuff fixed that actually needs to be fixed in a timely fashion. In Comp COD, it seems inevitable that situations like this are going to keep arising, and there's not really much you can do over other than I think I saw Arcity's tweet something like maybe like he misses the days of just being able to trust the pros to not do stuff like that. But especially in a match like this was really close in the standings. I think Boston had like a 10-point lead over Minnesota heading into this match, or it might have been tied based on Minnesota's first match. Regardless, it's a really close one for the standings, and it was really important. So whatever it takes. Hashtag shout out Tremy. And like I said, if that's velocity Boston's going for, that's what's going to happen. I mean, it seems like I don't know. It's obviously just a tricky situation, and it's really not even fun to discuss, despite all the drama and such around it. It would just, in a true balanced competitive environment, we don't even have to have this conversation in my eyes.
I'm trying to think of like a real world traditional sports example of something like this happening. But like the fact that I can't think of that many examples is probably just pointing to the fact that like there is a lot more competitive integrity in traditional sports than in esports, and specifically COD esports. Um, the only thing I can think of that was obviously there have been things throughout, basketball or something like the zone defense used to be banned in basketball, like you couldn't play zone, and that changed the game once it got banned. Obviously you're very familiar with baseball. The shift has been like a debated issue, and this was like the first year that they've like quote unquote banned the shift or like limited what you can do in shifting your defense. But like as far as like I'm there, and Belichick has definitely exploited things in the NFL rule book, and they've ended up having to change the rules because of it. I believe something happened with the Jets a few years ago when Adam Gase was the coach, and I'm pretty sure the next year the NFL like completely like made sure that they couldn't do that anymore. But like I just think in general we don't have that many of like loopholes to exploit in traditional sports. Maybe it's because there's been so much time that every time it happens, like the rule book is rewritten and you're not able to do it the next season. But I think in general, like this keeps happening in COD esports, and like sound EQ is not the only thing that the pros disagree about. We've seen so much, like this has been a years long debate about snaking, and it continues. Like just this weekend, you can see like there are 1v1s or 1v2, and players are just deliberately snaking. Like there's no like, oh, I was just trying to peek and like I just, I hit it twice or three times. Like no, they're snaking. They are admitting it. It's just it's kind of crap. Like as a viewer, of course, like I want my team to win. So like when something happens that benefits, so like something like for a Boston fan, they might be a little more hesitant to criticize the breach for doing this. But as a neutral fan or as a fan of another team, and especially if you're a fan of the Minnesota Rocker, you think what Boston did probably is absolute crap. And that's really cheap. And I like Dens. I like the Boston guys. But like to say that, we're just doing it because like we're trying to get the mental edge or we're trying to get the advantage. It's like, yeah, you're trying to get the advantage of a thing that we already know is broken and overpowered. And if Minnesota didn't want to GA it and they were like, well, no, we're going to use it, I'd have no problem with Boston saying we're going to use it too. Like it's just like who's going to win based on sound EQ. But when another team tries to get it GA'd and the other team says no, I think that's just kind of low. I don't think it's not a great look for the league. I'm sure Activision, if anybody really cares at Activision, I'm sure they don't want one of the biggest topics of the weekend to be about this. Instead, they probably want people to be talking about Vegas beating New York or OpTic's match against Vegas, or we'll talk about LAT and New York's match. Like, you kind of want the topic to be about, oh, that was a really great play. That was a great match. I'm so entertained. Not, did you see what Beans and Gunless were fighting about on Twitter? Like, that's not great for the league as a whole.
You could make the argument that it might not be great, but it could be beneficial to, the Twitter beef having more eyes on potential matches, but that's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah. I mean, it's more fun when it's midweek, like when it happens like Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, like before the matches start, because then it kind of fills the week and we can have some entertainment regarding the CDL. But, I really don't care about Gunless and Beans beefing on Twitter. It's a little more fun when it's Afro and Big Wake because these are two like current players and everything. But it's just, it's kind of weird. And sound EQ is like not even as like debatable about snaking. Like this is just like sound EQ is just the dumbest thing to ever exist in COD. Whereas snaking has just like always been around, and or not always, but like it's been around for a really long time, and it's just I guess Activision cannot figure out how to change that. So there's really nothing that we can do except hope that players don't do it. But yeah, Boston ended up winning that series 3-1. Like you mentioned, they were tied heading in to the series for 8th place or 7th place. Considering that the two bottom teams or the last two teams in, so to speak. But Boston wins 3-1. They take a 10-point lead over Minnesota, who are now only 2 games ahead of the Vegas Legion, and they're 1 game back from the Boston Breach. That's going to be interesting to watch. It's still this could be a really, really important result in the grand scheme of things. If Minnesota makes it to champs and Boston makes it to champs, it's probably not that important in everything. But if Minnesota gets knocked out and Vegas gets in by 1 match, yeah, I'm sure those Rocker players are going to feel a certain type of way about how things went down at the Minnesota home series.
Then you could also play the what if game with Minnesota getting these 4 matches on quote unquote land, no matter what the environment is. Mm-hmm. Them being the only team to have these home series during the online matches, so you can go back and forth and all that stuff.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think Clay. I don't think Clay said it exactly this way, but paraphrasing is like, you can make excuses and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, you got to go out there and you got to try and take care of business, no matter what the obstacles are and no matter what the other teams are doing. If you take care of something on your end, then you don't really have to worry about that as much. It definitely isn't what he said, but little bit of what I heard a clip of him saying infused with my own personal thoughts.
Yeah, I know he said it's a dog-eat-dog world, and like he doesn't really care, because I think Clay would do that 100%. Like if it came down to qualifying for champs or not, I think he would try to do whatever it takes to win and get through champs. Like it's just it's unfortunate that it's even up to the players. That should be something the developers should be able to fix, but it does not seem to be the case. But let's get back to the actual matches and push past the drama. LAT versus Toronto. I mean, this is like, in terms of standing, you would not think this is an upset, but with how Toronto played for the past month, LAT coming off of Major 4 championship, we've been talking them up, saying like maybe they're turning into the LAT that we saw last season, right in time for champs. They're gearing up for another world title. LAT lose to Toronto 3-1. Scrappy goes crazy, 43 kills in the opening hard point, and Toronto now is 2-0 in the Major 5 qualifiers after finishing 2-3 in the Major 4 qualifiers, or it might be 1-4. But either way, Toronto has had a complete turnaround in these qualifiers. What do you make of Toronto's turnaround? Why do you think the Ultra are now so good, despite having played probably the best team in the game and beating them 3-1?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good answer. Obviously we'll get to LAT's other match of the week after this, but might be a little bit of a major curse. Don't really know how best to describe it, but after winning a major, team struggling in the online qualifier seems to be a bit of a trend, just at least with the last 2 matches. Small sample size, I know, but bear with me. But yeah, this is definitely a quality win for Toronto, especially coming off that major win for LAT. You definitely expect them to win this one. You might have expected it to be a tougher match, but end of the day, all we really had to judge was LAT coming off a major, Toronto a better than expected major performance based on their qualifier play, but coming off of online qualifier, struggling in the Major 4 online qualifiers and going back to online. This is just a match you probably expected LAT to win, and wasn't the case. Like you said, Scrappy set a new hardpoint record, 43 kills. I think I saw somebody mention Kenny had 42 deaths in the map one. I think somebody said it was a record, but I wasn't able to find it again on Twitter, so that's unconfirmed. But a lot of deaths either way, and yeah, it was just a pretty surprising win. I guess it's even more surprising that was the map one was the map that LAT won, where Scrappy set the hardpoint kill record for the season. And then Toronto was able to take care of business in maps 2, 3, and 4 to close this one out.
Yeah, I think Toronto, their quote unquote turnaround could just be based on like they lost the 50-50s in the qualifiers, and that really kind of hurt them because I believe they lost like 3 game 5s in the qualifiers of the last qualifiers. And they played some tough teams, and now they're just winning those 50-50s, and they even took FaZe to a game 5 at the major. So I'm not sure what we can really take from Toronto. Maybe it was just like kind of a stretch of bad luck. Things just don't go their way in that specific time period, and it kind of looked worse because it all happened at the same time. But Toronto, another great win, 2-0 to start Major 4 qualifiers, and we'll talk about LAT's second match here shortly. But before we get to that, Florida LAG. Florida wins 3-2, extending LAG's losing streak, which is by far the most interesting part about this series. Neither of these teams are competing for, they're technically not eliminated from champs contention, but LAG is about as cold as a team can be. And Florida, while they picked up a few wins here and there over the past month or two, they're still 50 points behind Vegas, who's in 9th, and 70 points behind Minnesota in 8th. So it would take pretty much a Herculean effort from the Mutineers to get into champs. Any thoughts on this?
I think you tweeted something, or I think Crone tweeted like "blow it up bowl" or something. You were like the true blow it up bowl is London LAG.
Yeah.
So, obviously not exactly the most highly anticipated match of the weekend here, but good on Florida. Like you said, they might not be able to make a last minute run, but obviously winning this match puts them in a better position to potentially do something. Possibly even more miraculous than New York's run last year. So we'll have to see. Last couple majors, Florida has had, shown a spark where they were able to pull off a big upset in the losers bracket. Weren't able to do much more beyond that. So maybe, they put a couple wins together here in the qualifiers, get a winner's bracket start. That'd be pretty massive for them. And then who knows if they're able to go on a run from there, might be able to make some magic happen. But it definitely will be a Herculean task, like you said.
Yep. So 10 match losing streak for LAG. I'm not sure what the exact longest is, but I believe so. From this article from Upcomer from July 2022, the Paris Legion had lost 11 straight, which was a new CDL record. I'm not sure if they won after that because who knows with the Legion, but it's not been great for LAG, and I'm kind of hoping that they'll break the record now because, like, if you're gonna be bad, you might as well be really, really bad. That's kind of my logic as a Browns fan. Over the years, there's no point in being like the 13th or 14th worst team in the league. Next match was a really interesting match, but I can't say it was a great match if you're an Atlanta FaZe fan. OpTic sweep FaZe 3-0, which is kind of becoming a theme. Maybe not the sweeping part, but definitely OpTic winning and beating FaZe. A real trend developing here. 3-0. That's like really surprising that FaZe can't even win the search at this point against OpTic. Granted, it was a round 11 win for OpTic, but still losing all 3 maps. And, Hardpoint wasn't that close. Control was a clean sweep for OpTic. What do you think? Because we've obviously hyped up FaZe a ton over the past 2 years, and rightfully so. We thought very highly of them, and rightfully so. But over the past year, over the past 2 years, I guess whenever OpTic became OpTic Texas, it's become a very hard task for FaZe to beat them. What do you think of this? Like 3-0 for OpTic over FaZe, that just seems kind of unreal based on where we were just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be some kind of mental block or something at this point. And I was really surprised, given the history and OpTic's performance against FaZe so far this year. Not necessarily would have been surprised if OpTic won, but pretty surprised by the 3-0 nature of the win. And yeah, it just seems like, OpTic's got their number, and I feel like if I went back and looked, it feels like, trying different maps and stuff like that, because I don't think. Um, if I had to guess, Embassy has been one of Atlanta's best searches, and I feel like they haven't really played OpTic on it. Could be completely wrong there, but it just seems like complete dominance out of OpTic in this head-to-head matchup this year. And if it carries out throughout the year, that's obviously incredible for OpTic. But if these two teams square off at champs and Atlanta is able to win that one against OpTic, then all these other ones might not mean as much. So I still believe in FaZe. Just obviously this is a pretty convincing loss, and I think FaZe have the minds to try and figure out what's going wrong, and especially in the head-to-head matchup. But we'll just have to see if we see this matchup again, either at Major 5 at Champs, what they're able to do differently, if they're able to throw a wrench in the map pool or something to try and change things up, but who really knows. I will say too, shout out Dashy for that pretty wild sniper clutch on a BZ, and I think it was the 2-4 round. Hit like not a quick scope, but like a semi quick scope through a door on a BZ with 10 seconds left while he was standing on the bomb to get that clutch defuse. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. It was a pretty cool play, and definitely my favorite play from this past weekend.
FaZe are now 0-5 on the season versus OpTic, 4-15 in the maps. They've only forced a game 5 once in those 5 series, and that was in the Major 2 qualifiers. The last 2 matches, so this past weekend and at the Major 4, in the loser bracket finals, both of those were sweeps for OpTic. So kind of a little map streak going on here in favor of OpTic. And looking at like the maps and everything and the game modes, searches, unsurprisingly been their best game mode against OpTic. They're 3-3 in those 5 series. 1-0 on LSEO, 1-1 on Embassy, 0-1 on Fortress, 0-1 in Mercado. But they are 1-7 in Hardpoint and 0-5 in Control. So that's 1-12 in Respawn against OpTic this season. Not great. Not what you want as a FaZe fan. And I'm not sure exactly what they can do to fix that. I don't think Champs is in a month and a half. I don't know how much you can just overhaul your Respawn game to completely match OpTic, and by extension LAT, because LAT is a similar team to OpTic in that they are very, very good in respawns. I'm not sure what FaZe can do in the next 60 days to completely catch up, and I just don't think they will. Like I haven't seen anything this season that makes me think that FaZe can beat OpTic if everything is going right for both of them. If they meet in the winners finals, I'm going to favor OpTic. Even if OpTic loses and FaZe is on an incredible losers bracket run, I'd still favor OpTic in this case. And I can't believe I'm saying that, because OpTic for the past few years has been kind of inconsistent. Even at their highest, I was not completely sold on them, and I've been sold on FaZe for so long. But I think OpTic just has their number, and and it's been over multiple rosters, right? Because we've seen Arcides in the lineup. They've had the same kind of struggles. And this year with Slasher, they've had these struggles. The talent is obviously there. I don't think anyone doubts a BZ and Simp and Celium. You know, Celium might win the MVP. Who knows? And Slasher's one of the greatest players. You know, one of the greatest ARs to ever play. Arcee's been incredible for years and years. So I don't think it's a talent thing, but it's pretty crazy that we've gotten to this point where we're talking about it, and I'm very, very convinced like OpTic would beat FaZe in any scenario for the rest of the season. So I just don't know. I'm sure the FaZe fans that listen to this are probably not too happy because we've been gassing them up for so long, but I'm kind of stunned that this keeps happening when OpTic and FaZe match up. Last match of the week was LAT versus New York. A very interesting matchups to say the least. We both picked LAT to beat Toronto in the first series, in the Thieves' first series of the weekend. We both picked LAT to beat New York in this series, and they disappointed us both. They go 0-2 in the Major 5 qualifiers to start it off, and I don't know why. I mean, of course, these are two tough teams. New York and Toronto are two of the 5 best teams in the league. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that. Maybe Toronto, depending on how they are. But I think in general, these are two of the teams that have won majors this season. They're almost all going to, Toronto is definitely going to champs. New York is, kind of a hair away from getting into champs. But still, LAT to lose both these games, pretty surprising. What did you think of New York beating the Thieves here?
Yeah, so last week I was kind of saying, we expected LA Thieves to win this one, but this was going to be a really good test for New York because we had mentioned, I believe, New York lost at Major 4 to OpTic and FaZe, who came in second and third, but they didn't get to play LAT, who came in first. So this was, the opportunity for the fourth place team from the last major to play that the champion who they didn't match up against. And obviously that's a good test to see where New York is at, because we've been talking about, New York having their best performance since winning Major 1. So obviously this is a pretty big win for New York. Makes it a little tougher to judge just based on the strength of LAT at this current point, which again is just something super weird to think about, because just like Toronto after Major 4, or after Major 3, LAT win Major 4 and then have a winless start to the following major qualifiers. So that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier in the episode. It might be a little bit of a trend, or it just could completely be coincidence, but nonetheless, it's definitely, we're gonna have to see how LAT try to turn things around this weekend, because we were talking about it, last year with the same LA Thieves roster, how they kind of just steamrolled towards the end of the year, heated up at the right time, won the last major and won champs after that. They won Major 4, but there's one more major between Major 4 and champs this year. So if they struggle in these qualifiers, have a losers bracket start, that kind of kills any potential momentum they would have heading into champs, unless they go on another super wild losers bracket run like they did at Major 2 earlier this year. But nonetheless, yeah, it was a really solid win for New York. Puts them in a good position to try and have another strong performance at the final major of the year. And whereas New York, we're just gonna have to see LA Thieves, we're gonna have to see how they respond to this loss and the O2 performance this weekend.
What I was really surprised to see is that LAT and New York are really, really similar in their game mode win percentages. So LAT and New York, both have really, really strong records in respawn. 37-26 in hard point for New York, 42-26 in hard point for LAT, 27-15 in control for LAT, 23-15 in control for New York, and they're almost identical in search and destroy. 23-25 for LAT, 24-24 for New York. They both have, they've both won about 60% of their matches this season. Their win or their map win percentage, it's slightly higher for LAT, but it's it's basically a few series away. It's really not that big of a difference. They've obviously both won majors this season. In the standings, it's pretty tight as well. It's a 2-match difference. New York is obviously they're a little behind LAT, but it's it's been overall pretty good for them, and it's been overall pretty good for LAT. I don't know if this will happen consistently, because I feel just because we've seen New York win this most recent matchup, I would not think that's going to be the same every time, because LAT is a really good respawn team. They did lose both hard points, most notably in this series. They lost the first hard point, and then they lost both search and destroys. I don't think that's that's going to happen all the time, especially with New York not being like an overwhelmingly dominant search team. Even if LAT is not as well, and we know from the stats that they are not, they are both about 500% or 500 in search and destroy. I have to think that if you play these two teams 10 times, 5 of those times, I'm sure LAT will get the advantage in search, and 5 of those times you'll get New York to have the advantage in search. It's just who can pull out that control, probably, who can, if one of those teams can win both hard points, obviously that would be a big help as well. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised about the LAT thing. I don't think it'll continue, but I also thought that about Toronto when Toronto had their little slump to start Major 4 qualifiers. But something to keep an eye on nonetheless. Yeah, and that does it for the pick'em stuff. Our pick'em records. So I made a little bit of a comeback this week, mostly because, well, one, LAT disappointed both of us, but you were rocking with FaZe and against OpTic, and I was not. Minnesota and Boston, you picked Minnesota, I picked Boston in that one, and then Seattle versus Toronto, which I think I said I didn't feel confident about that one. I'm pretty sure about that because every time I pick against Seattle, it seems like they win, but that was not the case this weekend, and it really helped our my pick'em. So you went 4-6 this week, definitely probably your worst week since like week 1 of the season. And I went 7-3, which is a very good week for me. So I am now 2 games back. You are 101-77. I have a 99-79 record this season. So there's a chance, probably not a great chance, but there's a chance that I could take the lead heading into the final week of qualifiers for the 2023 CDL season, which would be pretty interesting. Let's get to these predictions. I don't think there was anything else that we had to talk about. I thought there was something, but I was going to bring up the Breaking Point thing. I don't know if you saw the fan share stuff that Breaking Point, they did a little bit of a survey, I guess, and they conducted the survey on Twitter and YouTube, and they reached out to fans to see who they support, who those CDL fans support. And of course, more than half the league supports OpTic, which is, not that surprising. The fan base as a whole is very much dominated by OpTic. But there are also a lot of fans that support more than one team. And usually they support multiple players who happen to be on different teams, which is, not very surprising because there's not a lot of continuity in Call of Duty, as you could probably attest to over the years. Like Scump is very much like an outlier, where he stuck with OpTic for almost his entire career. Although there was a weekend with NV and a little bit of Apex in MW3, but and Quantic Leverage before that. But mostly like teams change their rosters multiple times a year, and almost all of them will do it in the off season and completely overhaul a team. So 58.4% of CDL fans support more than one team. which is interesting. But most of those people that support either one or both teams are OpTic fans. And if you look at, there's a graphic that's the fan share. So for every one LAG fan, which LAG apparently is the least popular team according to Breaking Points data, for every one LAG fan, there are 18 OpTic fans. So OpTic's fan base is 18 times larger than the Gorillas. The second place team, so the team with the second most fans, according to this, the Las Vegas Legion have they have an 8.8% increase over, or they're 8.8% bigger, not percent, they're 8.8 times bigger than LAG are right now. Third place, LAT. Fourth place, FaZe. Fifth, Seattle. Sixth, Toronto. New York, Boston, London, Minnesota, Florida, and then LAG at the very bottom. I think that's pretty incredible. Breaking Point said that OpTic dominates the CDL fan share, which is 65%, and that includes all fans, including casual fans who support two teams. And Vegas made a splash this season with Clayster, and teams like LAT, FaZe, Surge, Ultra, and NYSL are growing fan share over time. As far as I believe the teams, I believe, yeah. So of the of fans that are just fans of one team in the CDL, OpTic, unsurprisingly, number one. Number two, not surprising very much, LAT. Number three, still not surprising, Atlanta FaZe. And then 4 and 5, I was a little surprised more about 5 than 4, but fourth is the New York Subliners. And then fifth, the Seattle Surge, which I think is surprising considering they were so bad for the first 2 seasons of the CDL. I'm kind of just surprised, and I don't think that they have any of these big players that like you would think, like attached for Minnesota. Like he has a big fan base. A lot of people know him over the years. I'm sure there's better examples. New York last year did have Crimsix. They had Clayster. So I'm not really surprised about that, but I am a little bit surprised about Seattle. And the only other graphic in this thread was teams whose fans support multiple teams. So Boston, LA, the Las Vegas Legion, and LAG, more than 90% of their fan base also cheers for another team. So, I mean, it's not that surprising when you look at Vegas, like, because I'm sure that's happened with some of the Vegas sports teams, because it's very much a, at least in traditional sports, like it's a tourist town. So it makes sense for you to be a fan of the Vegas Golden Knights, but you might be a fan of the, Binks Colorado Avalanche. But when you go to Vegas, you're a fan of the Golden Knights. With the Legion, I think it's obviously a lot of fans of Clayster have become Legion fans. I was, I was not a supporter of the Legion, but I was a Paris is winning champs supporter, and I think there's a distinct difference between that. But
who knows? Maybe our movement's taken off. Shout out Mike.
Maybe maybe the Ego Chall podcast and Mike Merchant has changed the Las Vegas Legion, and we're pretty much the only driving force behind their fan base. But I think it's still incredible. Like, even though most of the fans that support the Legion are supporting other teams, they still have, according to this, the second most fans. Like, they're beating the Thieves, beating FaZe. I think that's pretty incredible. Did you have any takeaways from this stuff? Because I saw it earlier and I forgot to put it in the doc.
No, I was just looking at the graphic you're talking about here, where the fan share one, and outside of Vegas, notably, like, jumping out at the top there. The other thing I noticed, I'm kind of surprised how low Minnesota is. But at the same time, obviously nothing is set in stone yet, but we've heard 3 reports over the last few weeks / months of potentially LAG, selling its franchise spot Minnesota potentially looking for somebody to, join them or sell their spot, and then Florida rebranding to Miami Heretics. Those three reports that we've heard are for the three teams that are the lowest in terms of fan share at the bottom here.
Mhm.
So that's kind of surprising, and I'm sure not necessarily coincidental, although it might be. The other thing too, you got to give credit to Boston Breach. It could be a little bit of the Zinni effect, but obviously Methods hasn't been playing the last couple of months. But to see, Boston, the newest team in the league, not at the bottom, speaks volumes to what the org has been able to do in terms of connecting with fans. And obviously, Boston is a big sports city, but I don't necessarily think there's a huge correlation between geolocation and the fans in terms of the CDL. But there was an event in Boston earlier this year, so maybe that helped boost their numbers a little bit. Regardless, it is a little interesting to see that newest team up there above some, especially in my opinion. Like, I would be surprised to see Boston over Minnesota, just because in my head I think of Minnesota has done a really good job of being one of those organizations from outside of Call of Duty, coming in, making an impact, doing a lot of cool stuff on social media, and having the press conferences for the press, and having these home series events when no other team is doing that this year. A bunch of examples.
Yeah, there's actually somebody in the comments of Breaking Point, and they said, I almost don't believe Minnesota is that low. Felt to me like they do well with their fan base. And Breaking Point replied, our data was sourced from Twitter and YouTube users, which may not adequately represent Rocker's fan base, but it was the easiest way for us to take a deep, credible sampling of CDL fans. And I understand that. Like, I don't really know how Breaking Point would have done this survey otherwise. It kind of just based on social media, and like, you're getting fans to say, like, who are you fans of, but they're also active social media users that know Breaking Point, which is like even smaller than like the normal CDL audience that are kind of like casual fans of COD, I'm assuming. And I would also say that Minnesota would probably have a very high like, I would imagine that Minnesota's like local support is probably higher than other teams because they're doing like watch parties and home series. So maybe they're getting a lot of, Minnesota or like Midwestern fans that are more just supporting them locally and maybe not through social media. That's the only thing I can really think of, because I agree with you. Minnesota does seem like they're doing a really good job with kind of trying to bring in their fans and making it more engaging for their fan base than other teams. But maybe it's not reflecting that in the social media data. I'm not quite sure about that. I believe there was something else that you brought up. You said like Boston is at they're 2.2, so they have pretty much double the fans that LAG do. The one I was really surprised about, other than Minnesota, was London, because it's the only English team, the only non-North American team. Obviously, the first few years they were going with these all English lineups. It just feels like a really disappointing thing. Like, if these numbers are accurate, I think Breaking Point tried to do the best job they could. I'm sure of that. But so if these things are accurate, London being one of the least popular teams in the league is not great, because the support that we saw London and England as a whole support the CDL when we did that event in 2020. Obviously that was feels like a decade ago, but there was a lot of support, and I think people really took to the fact that like the London audience was so passionate about the Royal Ravens and they were passionate about Call of Duty. It just maybe is not reflective, and maybe because London has struggled so much this season, that can kind of skew the data because people jump off the bandwagon. I don't know even if Clayster was on the team, but the Legion were doing really poorly like they did last year. I'm not sure how many people would be like, yeah, I'm a fan of the Vegas Legion. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe the fact that they've gone away from this UK English lineup thing, which I personally was a very big fan of, because I think these teams should try to go after players that kind of represent their communities, and that's one of the biggest things that we criticized the Legion for when they were in Paris was like they literally didn't have a French player. I think they had Brezzy 1 year, but he was like a substitute that never played. That's not good enough, especially if you're not competing. It's different if you're winning championships, but when you're not, it kind of sucks, and it probably alienates a little bit of the local fan base. But yeah, I figured I'd bring that up. I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts on that, but really good work by Breaking Point. I thought it was an interesting thing to learn. Especially that so many fans are supporting more than one team, which is, it's not usual in actual traditional sports. Maybe basketball, because players kind of move and, teams' results are so dependent on players, but definitely not that common like in baseball or football or anything like that. Let's do our pick'ems. Let's get our predictions out of the way and we can get on out of here. Friday, May 12th, 3 matches. London versus LAG. The Blow It Up Bowl is here. And I am going with the London Royal Ravens because I am crossing my fingers a little bit that LAG break this record.
Yeah, this is one you don't want to pick, but I just can't bring myself to pick London, so I'm going to begrudgingly go with LAG.
Florida versus Boston. Boston still trying to hold on to one of the last champ spots. Florida, maybe they'll do a New York and pull off an epic comeback, but I'm going to go with the Boston Breach.
Me too.
Especially if they're using sound EQ. Atlanta versus Vegas. I mean, Vegas had a very, very strong week last week, but I'm going to go with the Atlanta FaZe.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Atlanta too, but it definitely is worth mentioning that Vegas played much tougher against OpTic than Atlanta did, and, Vegas is coming off a big upset win over New York. Atlanta's coming off that dominant loss to OpTic, so a little bit of momentum. You never know what's happening with Vegas online these days, so I wouldn't be too surprised if Vegas is able to steal one here, but I'm still going to go with Atlanta.
I mean, Control is probably going to be the biggest game mode in this series because they're both, not great at hardpoint, both very good in search, but Control has kind of been the Legion's thing over the past week. So who knows if that trend's going to continue, and that could be a turning point in the series. Saturday, May 13th, Atlanta versus London. Going to go with FaZe.
Yep.
LAT versus Florida. The Thieves obviously starting 0-2, but I think they'll probably get back into the win column against the Mutineers.
Yep, I got to go with the Thieves here.
Seattle versus OpTic. I could see this being a match in which the Surge win, but I don't think it's smart to pick against OpTic, especially online right now.
Yep, I'm going to OpTic too, but this definitely should be the closest match, in my opinion, of this particular day of the weekend.
You don't think that New York versus LAG will be Game 5, Round 11?
I do not.
Okay. Me neither, but I was just checking. New York, I will pick the Subliners over LAG.
I will too.
In the last 3 matches, Sunday, May 14th, Vegas versus Minnesota, probably the most interesting match of the weekend. Because of the champ seeding, the implications of this. Vegas, as we know, 2 games back from Minnesota. Minnesota in 8th place right now. Vegas also has the tiebreaker this season because I think they're undefeated against the Rocker. They're like 3-0 against the Rocker this year. So regardless of how this ends up, if they do end up being tied, Vegas would advance, I believe, because it's head-to-head first. So I'll go with Vegas. I mean, they're undefeated against the Rocker. They have to be feeling really, really good about how last week went, even with the OpTic loss. Minnesota, who knows? Maybe Boston rattled them with the sound EQ stuff. So I'm going to go with the Legion.
Yep. Vegas is winning champs, baby. Got to get there first, and they got to take care of business here. But huge caveat here is that this is another prime example of just like at Major 4, Vegas has a chance with this match in particular to control its own destiny in a head-to-head matchup against the team directly above them. They have to take care of business in this one if they want to get to champs, and they It's obviously can't really be compared to a major where you're starting in the winners bracket and you lose 2 matches.
Yeah.
But this is almost as close to that scenario as you, and if you are Vegas in that position where you're chasing a team, you have to be, if you're a true competitor, you have to be hoping to play that team directly above you so you can control your destiny and not have to rely on tiebreakers and all that other stuff that's just out of your control. So I'm going with Vegas. Really excited for this matchup in particular, and I will be very devastated if Vegas wins, which is very weird for me to, or if Vegas loses, because it's weird for me to say that because I really don't feel like I'm actually a fan of any CDL team, but it's kind of getting to that point where I really just want Vegas to make champs.
Yeah, I mean, it was like New York with last season. I wasn't really a fan, but just the idea of them making this incredible run and clinching a spot at champs at the very last second, I think that's just an interesting way to go about it. And especially, I kind of want Vegas and Minnesota to like match up at the major. Maybe if it's in like the losers bracket, like, loser goes home, winner goes to champs, like that kind of stuff is honestly what the CDL should really be hoping for. Hopefully it will get there, but Vegas has it could honestly, a loss against Minnesota here could break the season for Vegas, just because the deficit might be just far too great for them to come back and secure a spot at champs. Last 2 matches on Sunday, Toronto versus OpTic. Toronto obviously started 2-0. OpTic beat Vegas and Atlanta to start. So it could be a fight for the number 1 seed depending on how these teams continue to play. I'm going to go with OpTic, but I'm very interested in how this match is going to go down.
Yeah, I think, prior to last week's matches and Toronto showing last week online, I'm a little more excited for this matchup as opposed to the previously, but I still think OpTic should take this one just based on their current form.
Last match, Seattle versus Boston. Going to go with the Surge. Not feeling confident about that at all, but I don't really feel confident about the Breach either.
Yep, I'm going with Seattle too, which means we have all of the same picks this week except for the Blow It Up Bowl,
which is the most important match, obviously. Yeah, that about does it. So I will not be taking the lead in the pick'em regardless of how things go. We could get all of these picks wrong, but it doesn't really matter because I will just have to make that comeback in last week qualifiers or maybe at Major 5, maybe at Champs. Who knows? I don't think I've ever beaten you in pick'em, like even when Mike was doing it. So probably not going to happen, but we will see. Make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, obviously Apple Podcasts as well. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show will be sometime next week, probably live on May 16th, which is Tuesday, and then the feed will be updated Wednesday morning. That's kind of the groove we kind of gotten into at the moment. It could change. You guys might get it a day earlier. Probably not, because I am going home for Mother's Day and then coming back on Monday, so that's probably not going to happen, but it could. Who knows? You never can guarantee anything with the Ego Chall Podcast. We are the most unpredictable podcast on the internet. But yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll recap what happened in the week 2 qualifiers, and we will preview the very last week of qualifiers of the 2023 CDL season. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. As you just mentioned, a little early happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Looking forward to the matches this weekend and looking forward to talking to you guys about them next week as well. So until then, remember to send the chow.